Hi, this is Leanne with Markegy. Today I'm joined by Brian Kotlyar, and he is the VP of Marketing and Growth at Hightouch. Brian, go ahead and tell us about your background.
Sure. Thanks for having me, Leanne. I guess to be relatively brief, um, I started my career in market research and things like that, but moved very swiftly into trying to help high startups just grow really fast. And I had a very fortunate experience of helping a company scale, which was then acquired by now public Sprinkler, where I built teams and led kind of all global demand. Transitioned from there to a company called Intercom, famous for the little bubble in the bottom corner of many of your favorite websites and applications, where I had a similar journey and role and spent time there during their hyper growth phase. Went from there to a publicly traded company called New Relic. I was part of a turnaround team that helped that company kind of reactivate and triple revenue growth rate in only about 18-month period of time, which resulted in very successful acquisition by a private equity company. And then today, as you mentioned, I lead marketing and growth at Hightouch, where we help companies kind of activate their data and use it for sophisticated personalization and other marketing tactics. So yeah, that's me.
Awesome. I mean, what an interesting journey. And I don't think people give enough credit to what can be done in 18 months.
It's a long time. Honestly, if you really think about it, it's like, gosh, you can have two kids in 18 months.
Yeah.
Um, and so, yeah, it takes, a very bold strategy, and you have to really kind of go for it and work with a lot of intensity and work with a lot of conviction. But yeah, when you think about, you could learn the violin in 18 months. You can learn to run a marathon in 18 months. You can turn around a publicly traded company that's struggling in 18 months and triple its market capitalization. And so, yeah, I think you overestimate what you can do in a day, but you underestimate what you can do in a year or 18 months. So,
Yeah. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. So as you were, kind of going through these experiences and your experiences now at High Touch, there was like some of your skills and abilities and helped you formulate different strategies that you would use, but what were some of the pain points that like inspired you to think differently or that stood out along the way?
yeah, I mean, I think a common theme across all the companies I've worked for was, even though each company in itself is really innovative and had some like unique attributes and technologies, um, I kind of use this term, like all of those companies were in markets that were kind of a fist fight. There was, you sometimes you get really fortunate where you sort of strike gold in like a whole new area and you're able to really grow really rapidly. I've never been that lucky. It's always been a grind. It's always been a fight to achieve what we're trying to achieve. And so a lot of my experience, a lot of the things that, when I counsel people or coach people or whatever, it comes from the perspective of like, nothing's going to get handed to you. You have to find ways to stand out. You have to find ways to kind of outmarket, outwork, and kind of earn the market share that you want. Um, and so yeah, I think a lot of, and I'm happy to go into particular details, but I think a lot of sort of my message, a lot of my personal experience really comes from that place of like, there's 10 companies bigger than you with more money, more budget, more people. There's 50 companies your same size, uh, and you're all fighting for, and probably another 100 that were just funded by Y Combinator or something, and you're all going for the same prize. How do you win? And I think a lot of us confront that every day because the days of sort of these vast blue oceans in most markets are kind of gone. Even AI, look at what's going on right now, right? New idea, 10 million companies spawned in like the matter of a week.
Yeah. I mean, it's definitely a lot more crowded. And I think that with that crowding, you mentioned something that's really clutch. Besides the blue ocean, because within the blue ocean or any ocean, you've got to say like this is what makes me float. Um, but in a competitive space, how do you differentiate? Like how do you make it so that your company is the one that people know about?
hmm Well, I think and please guide me toward what you want to focus on, because I think it's a really big question, right? It's a lot of the essence of the strategy and then execution of the whole job. But I kind of try and think about this from the perspective of sort of like key insights to help you go to market, and then execution of those insights to help you win in the market. And sort of the insights part goes back to like, I don't, in some ways, kind of like classic marketing training. Like you go, I send this article to my team all the time, or this example to my team all the time of like the famous Ogilvy marketing ad where it shows the Rolls Royce and it says, the only thing you hear at 65 miles an hour is the clock ticking. And I use this example of just like world-class product marketing of any era, which
Mhm.
kind of links capability to value in a really visceral and emotional way. And the origin of that insight, the origin of this like really deep-seated campaign that like exploded sales for the company was deeply understanding the product, talking to its buyers, spending countless hours reading the brochures, reading the manuals, coming to understand what is special about this car. It's its quality, it's its luxury, and how does that actually manifest? Well, it manifests in the thing that, especially back in the 50s, wasn't possible in cars, which is quiet. Cars were loud, noisy, rattly things, you know?
Yeah.
So, you take that idea and you apply it to our products, it comes a lot to like really listening to customers, really sitting and I listen to I can't even tell you how many hours a week of our interactions with our customers because they're all automatically recorded with all of our marvelous technology these days. It's all recorded, it's all transcribed, it's all there. But I'm always shocked by how rarely my peers do that. Uh, but what I'm hunting for, I'm not trying to hunt for like examples of a sales rep doing a good job or a bad job or some secret gossip or dirt about a competitor. What I'm hunting for is my version of it's quiet at 65 miles an hour. Um, and I can give you a couple examples, but that's essentially the first part of the process. And the second part of the process is, okay, what do we do with that? In the term we use all the time internally at Hightouch is distribution. A good idea doesn't matter if it's sitting in our desktop. So like, how do we get it in front of our people? And especially because we don't have the kind of money our competitors do, we're fighting against many publicly traded companies. Their weekly ad budget is my annual ad budget, like literally.
Yeah.
Um, and so how will we work through communities, work through social, work through creative that kind of travels, work through our customer champions, work through our network, work through what ad budget we do have to ensure that the idea moves. And if it's the right idea and we do that right, you get just a 10x return on what would otherwise be like a mediocre shrug your shoulders campaign. So yeah, I'll pause there because that was a lot, but happy
No,
to
that
speak more deeply.
and that's great. That's great because I think what stood out for me about the specific like Rolls Royce example is that if you're combing the books, like the book that comes with the car, like, oh, you got to change the oil change this often, you got to do this. Nowhere in there is it like all you hear is the sound of the ticking. You have to get to know the people and not just listen to what they're saying, but listen to what they're not saying and the tone that they're saying it with. And that's the difference between listening to the calls and just looking at the transcription. We can use AI to pick up cloud like word clouds and pull out like what it thinks the sentiment is, and we can do all sorts of stuff. But what you can't replace is that like face-to-face conversation or appearance and being able to read the person's mannerisms, tone of voice, their background, and being like, oh, when they said, it's the off the record part that you have to find.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah, I can give you a very specific example that was very important to my current company's high touch success. So not like we're still a startup, we're still growing, not like we won, but a really important moment, which was I was listening to one of these calls, and a woman was talking about her struggles implementing a competitive product for a much bigger company, and I was doing something else, I was doing the dishes or whatever, but her voice kind of cracked when she was describing this because of the amount of frustration that had come with this very, very expensive, very reputationally damaging failed software implementation. Like her career had been harmed by this. And I'm like, wait, did that really just happen? I rewind and I listen again and again and again. And it starts to open up this realization that like that there's this kind of deep-seated regret around certain aspects of the product category. And that became the underlying idea for a campaign we ran called Friends Don't Let Friends by a CDP, which is like very specific to my industry. But basically, CDPs are this legacy way of collecting data for personalization and marketing. And we have an alternative approach that we believe is better. And that became, we were running basically the same content with a different moniker for months, and it was kind of working. We flipped over to the Friends Don't Let Friends, inspired by that woman's emotional, almost like a cry on a call. And all the performance of all of our ads, all of our blog posts, all of our social campaigns just went up like 5x, 10x step change improvement. I'm not exaggerating, like literally that
Yeah.
ratio. Um, and so yeah, it's like when you find it, you need to notice it. I easily could have skipped that call, and then you got to figure out what to do with it. It's not like she said "friends don't let friends." Those words didn't come out of her mouth.
Right.
We interpreted her emotional appeal into it, and it became this really successful campaign.
Yeah, and I love that example because it's just once again reiterating that you can count on written words for so much, but like that inflection in her voice really changed it, and it made you like it rang alarm bells because we're hardwired to have alarm bells when we hear someone get very emotional nearby us. Um,
Especially about like random enterprise software, you know.
Right. But it turns out like very valid feeling and big fear that, in a B2B or, a large purchase or transaction, the champion, the people that are like, hey, this is the one that we should do, they're putting themselves on a pretty big line sometimes. And
Yeah,
and I don't think they get enough credit for it.
yeah. I mean, honestly, yeah. You make whatever. I don't know how much money this woman made, but like, she makes $100,000 a year, and she's buying a $500,000 piece of software. Like, this is a big deal, you know. So yeah, I totally agree.
Yeah, and I think that if you work at a mature company, you can be using a legacy item, and you're gonna be like, what were they thinking? This thing is this, and like, and the people that maybe that person that implemented it isn't even there anymore, but you're like, this was another one of their ideas, and like you're like salty about it, but maybe it wasn't that person's fault. Um, so I think that it's really understated how much personal like professional branding or reputation can be at stake for people.
For sure. Yeah.
um so so there's that kind of like customer intimacy aspect of listening to the calls and really hearing what they're saying and then distributing it in a meaningful way. um what are some things that might be like an obstacle for that you've encountered when trying to do that or that you've seen other people? So let's say that someone's listening to the calls and they're like, "Yeah, I think that this is what we should do based on that." Like where does it fall apart?
Sure. Well, just there's the obvious one which I already alluded to, which you just don't do it. But let's
Yeah.
assume you're doing the work, you know?
Yeah.
Um, the next part I would say is that we need to come to this with a certain amount of like, you need to have a little bit like the mind of a child, I think is like the phrase they use. Like, you really need to be there to absorb and to learn. When you're hunting for a particular thing, you'll find it.
Hmm.
And that's like human pattern recognition stuff. It's like, oh, I'm thinking of buying a red Volkswagen Jetta. Guess what? You're going to see Jettas everywhere, and
Yeah.
they're all going to be red. It's just how like our monkey brains work. But when you come to those things, and you honestly are just listening. You listen for what causes people to lean forward, lean back, change their emotion, the timbre of their voice. What speeds up the conversation when everyone's really excited because it's going on, and what slows down because it's super awkward and weird and bad. Like those are. If you're there with an agenda, you miss it.
Hmm.
And so I think that's really important too. Um, but let's assume you come with it as a child, you do the diligence, you find the notes, you have your good ideas. What I also think can be really challenging is like then honing that idea into something usable, because essentially companies ruin everything, committees ruin everything. And
Yeah.
so trying to get your idea actually into the world, especially at a bigger company, like at Hightouch, we're relatively small. So if I have an idea I'm really passionate about, also I'm in charge, so I get to just say things. But like I don't need to like filter stuff through that many filters for it to come to the market and get real feedback from the market. But any company of any size, especially if you're not in a really, really senior role, like this takes a lot of persuasion to get an idea actually out in the world and to have it not be ruined in the process. And I think that there's a lot to that that can be very affect people's actually career success a lot, which is how good are you not only just finding the idea, but somehow like protecting this little candle flame from getting blown out before it can actually get out there and not turn into just some like piece of junk that you don't even want your name associated with, you know? So yeah, I think that that's something I learned working at like larger organizations prior to this one that served me really well, which is, kind of internal selling, I guess, to put like a lame name on it.
Yeah, and I mean, and sometimes it's just luck, right?
Mhm.
It's very hard to tell when you are interviewing or looking at taking a position what it's going to be like in the day to day if, the person if you're going to be able to establish that type of um, you know, line of sight from creation to out in the world. And there's some industries where it's a lot harder. There's uphill battles.
Mhm.
Heavily regulated industries, whether or not it's intentional, it gets diluted because in healthcare you got to CYA.
Mhm.
And in case anyone hasn't heard CYA, cover your blank. But that's part of what the personalities of these larger organizations can be like.
Mhm.
I definitely see that it has fallen apart for a number of people or things where they really thought they were onto something, and then it got changed just enough to be the antithesis of what they were suggesting.
Mhm.
Um, Besides that, what about like um what about when, like, the product might need some work? Have you ever seen that turn into part of it?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the most challenging things that can happen as a marketer is the campaign is good, the product is not. um, and that actually is real. Like, sometimes you really have a good insight of the psychology of the market or the person you're marketing towards. You can have a really good message and a good way to deliver it, but the product doesn't live up to the promise. It actually is noisy at 65 miles an hour. So the first thing is like you need to like just getting clicks and attention is actually not in service of anybody if it can't be paid off. So one thing I think is a really good mechanic to kind of filter on is, and I talk about this a lot with my team. It's kind of a simple heuristic we use is like, is it true? And then is it interesting?
Mhm.
Those two things don't guarantee success, but the absence of those two things really makes success very unlikely. And the thing that's important about that true point is it might be a campaign that could work for a different company or a different product in your space for whom that point is true, but it can't work for you because it's not. And because it's very rare for any product to just like suck universally and be bad in every way, in that case, I would just suggest polishing your resume. Like, but it just may not be great in the way you want it to be great for the sake of your campaign. And so the hard part is you actually have to, even though you have the insight, you have to actually put it aside. You can give that feedback to your partners who develop the product and your executives and say, look, if this thing did this, I could run this campaign, it would be great. But it doesn't. So I'm going back and I'm going to figure out what is great about this thing. And I'm going to find the insight and the campaign that will work for this product. Like almost any product has something special about it that you can be effective with, but if that match isn't there, it's kind of new campaign time or new job time is kind of it. There's just no real way around it. I hate to be so like defeatist a little bit, but you can't market something that's horseshit basically.
I mean, yeah, there's that saying, like, a gold covered piece of what, like poop. Like, you can polish it, you can paint it, but it's underneath it all, it's still a problem.
Mhm.
Um, in in one sense, what I think is missing is the marketing department going through the entire customer journey, start to finish, and being familiar of what that experience is really like. If you're new in a job, or even periodically, because there's always updates and features that come out, is the first thing you should do is go through the customer flow, like a real one, not like a test one, because you should see, like, hey, are we actually spamming them? Hey, like, we say in this email or we said in this ad that you could do XYZ, but then the instructions on how to do it, like, where is it?
Mhm.
And so I think that's, if you aren't doing that already, you should insist on doing that within your first 10 days
Yeah.
at an organization.
I agree completely. And I guess further, you can push the concept even harder. This is something I learned. I had an old leader at a prior role who came from Intuit. And
Mhm,
Intuit, I don't know if they invented this term or they got it somewhere else, but they have this concept which I just kind of fall in love with. They call it a follow me home.
mhm.
And it is exactly what it is. They follow their buyers home and they stand in their house and they stand in their office and they watch them work. And for them, it's where a lot of their best product ideas have come from and their most deepest insights have come from because, Intuit services small businesses. And so like they're watching the proprietor of a auto body shop in that little corner office in the way back corner of the place, shifting through their papers, managing their bills, dealing with this, that. And that's where they get the spark of insight that, oh my goodness, the product needs to do this, or we need a whole new product line or whatever. And so it starts, of course, with to use the thing you sell, like actually use the thing you sell. So you have the opportunity to hear the clock ticking or whatever the case may be. And then there's a different thing, which is, okay, what is the role of your product in their broader life? And that's where a lot of other emotional insights can come from that can really fuel your marketing and help you develop like your tonal approach and things like that.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, and I think that that's where people either do it right or completely miss the point with the whole jobs to be done strategy. Like that's where they make or break it. If they really like show up at the mechanic's office and they see like in the real world what their service is doing for that person, what job is it doing? Is it just, collecting money, or is it making it so they can just get to the next car and do blah 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 faster?
Mhm.
But then people interpret things however they want to, which is great. You should. But sometimes that means missing the point.
Mhm.
Uh, um, so when we think about like staying on the point and in long-term value and in maybe even like some short-term values, how do we get the attention and stand out and distribute it? What are some like backbone needs to that?
Yeah. So I think something that especially, well, I was going to say especially smaller, but I honestly, I think even very large companies struggle with is the the concept of integrated marketing and also speed.
Yeah.
So when you work at a big company, integrated marketing is never easy. Don't misunderstand me. I'm not saying it's easy, but you tend to have far fewer like campaign ideas and things. So you have more of an opportunity to like coordinate, schedule, plan, say this is our message for a while. A lot of our tactics are media based, it's like buying media. And so we can develop our media plan and things like that. And so you can do integrated marketing, but it tends to be slow. And then you go to a very, very small company, they're going to tend to move much more quickly, but their messages change a lot more frequently. There's just a lot more just like randomness and chaos going on because it's a small company and that's how small companies work. Um, and so you kind of have these extremes. You have very coordinated and slow, which is kind of bad because you need to move quickly in this market, even as a big company. Or you have like fairly non-integrated and quick, which is also kind of bad because you're not getting that message repetition and message absorption from the audience you're trying to reach, and you don't necessarily learn because you're just jumping around from thing to thing to thing in a very chaotic way. And so I think like it can be kind of magical if you can figure out how to be integrated and fast.
Yeah.
Um, and that's what I always strive with my team to do, both in my prior roles and here at High Touch. And I'm not trying to claim that we're masterful at this, in the past or today, but I think that being the standard at which we are seeking to operate helps kind of push us to always try to be more integrated and try to move faster at all times. And it really adds up is the thing I would say. Like that polish and messaging consistency, it adds up through repetition over time. And speed, just because you get more bites at the apple and you learn faster and you have more opportunities to kind of impress a message upon your audience, also adds up. So it's like a cumulative benefit. You don't feel the benefit in the first tactic or the eighth. You feel it in the 80th and the 800th that you've been so on message, so consistently with so much repetition for so long. You just kind of, you can, to my point earlier about hyper competitive markets, you can punch way above your weight in a hyper competitive market in that way.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, what one piece of advice that it brings to mind is that we as marketers, we're gonna get bored of what we're saying way before our audiences. We're gonna want the shiny new way of saying it, or we're gonna be sick of like, oh, why is it always gotta be like this? Because you need the repetition. You've got to like really like dedicated zealously repeat within, within that branding, and positioning, and the details in the copy need to support that. And if it pivots, that's great too, but you're going to get sick of it first.
Yeah, I mean, the best way to prove that to yourself, I couldn't agree more. I think about it all the time. And the best way you would see that, again, goes back to just talking to your customers. The
Yeah.
frequency with which I listen to or interact with a customer, and they're like, it would be so awesome if your team just did blah. And I'm like, you realize we launched that 3 months ago, you have it for free. Um, and they're like, what? And I like pull up the application. I'm like, you see this button you click on 17 times a day? You see this other button 1 centimeter below it? And like they kind of sheepishly, say, oh, okay. And it's not that they did anything wrong. It's that their job is to do their job. Their job isn't to pay attention to you.
Yeah,
So we get
exactly.
sick of it because we're like, we told them. And it's like, well, did you tell them 74 times? And did you check if they heard you? If not, they probably didn't.
Yeah, did you spell it out explicitly, or were you trying to be clever? Because clever is not kind. um, but one of the things that we kind of talked about at one point was using data to reinforce product market fit, and how that helps to not just move forward with the short term kind of campaigns and the getting with speed, but the long term of it all. So, what are some kind of ways that you would do that, or that you see that?
um, well, I think let me ask. I just want a clarifying question to make sure I answer your question well, which is, do you mean like using data to help inform what's working, what isn't, or do you kind of mean using data in the context of like actual go to market and marketing to help like kind of validate claims and improve the credibility of the marketing, or
Well,
both?
now I wanna do both. Both of those are questions I think we should talk about. So, I mean, I guess, yeah, let's go for both.
Okay. Um, so okay, on the former, so I've been very fortunate. I've like led analytics teams. I've worked with a lot of excellent operations teams, and so, um, like though I don't believe you can find the clock ticking or the friend zone of friends idea in the spreadsheet. I think the spreadsheet is required,
Yeah.
um, because it's the only real like we need quantitative and qualitative indicators of efficacy. And so, like, on the quantitative side, like the first thing I've done at pretty much every job since I learned this lesson is, maybe the second, maybe the first is I do what you said, which is trying to understand the product. The second is try to understand what my indicators of like efficacy going to be, and what are like the leading indicators down through what are like the fundamental business driving ones that matter. And I usually am trying to figure out like the 2 to 4 things that have a disproportionate effect on the business. So, for example, at Hightouch, it's people that request demos. That there's many metrics of interest. That one is the biggest predictor of future revenue that we're going to make. And then there's things further up funnel that tell me the likelihood that people will request demos, like certain kinds of traffic we acquire through certain channels that visit certain pages and so on. And so, like, if I do that stuff way up, I can have some semi confidence will affect that middle metric, which will then hopefully affect the lagging metric. And I think every business has some version of this. And one of the first jobs is to understand it, because then that's how you're going to rate the efficacy of your ideas as they kind of go in the market. The reason I can tell you that the Friends Don't Let Friends was better than the preceding campaign is because all these metrics moved. Without that knowledge, I might, which I've seen many marketers do, like try and walk in front of an executive team and say, "Oh, it's way better," and they'll say, "How do you know?"
Mhm.
And then you kind of sheepishly say, "Well, I got a couple tweets about it, and Jim in sales mentioned that his cousin had seen it," and they're like, "Jim in sales' cousin doesn't write checks, so like, this is not helpful."
Where's the money?
Yeah,
Where
exactly.
is the money?
And so, like, what's interesting is Jim's cousin might be right. It
Mhm.
actually may have worked, but the problem is all your evidence is so qualitative in nature that it's not adequate to really move with confidence and then represent confidence. And so, because just as easily could be wrong. Like, I don't know who Jim's cousin is. They might be Bob Iger. They might be Bob that works at the coffee shop. So who knows?
Yeah.
Um, so I think that's kind of my perspective on data and why marketers, it really is beneficial. I say this to my team all the time. Very few of us came up through like math degrees and statistics degrees. I didn't. I studied labor union organizing. Um, uh, very few of us like who end up in the marketing disciplines really came through like STEM. Some do, and God bless them, but very few do. But I really talk to my team a lot here and in all my past roles is like, it kind of doesn't matter. You have to get over the bar of data fluency. You just have to learn how to read a chart, learn how to make a good one, learn, go take some Excel keyboard shortcut classes. If possible, go learn SQL, which for those that don't know, it's like the simple coding language to interface with big data sets inside of like a data warehouse. If you can, at last company, we actually paid anybody on the team on the company's dime could go take a class and learn and get certified, which was thousands of dollars per person decision, but was well worth it. Like the ROI on that was enormous. So I don't mean to you can see I'm getting excited. I don't mean to get too worked up about it, but it's not optional, in my opinion, for marketers to be fluent with data, even if you don't like it, even if you failed 8th grade algebra 5 times, it doesn't matter. You kind of have to learn it if you're going to be successful in your career. And so, yeah, that's kind of on the first part of that.
Yeah. I mean, I'm a STEM major. I started off in physics and anatomy labs and chemistry classes, and I think that that's part of my competitive advantage. You've got someone like me who is like, well, that's not what the data says, or that's not a true experiment. You've got too many biases. And I think that even without necessarily going to college for STEM, is the way that you interpret the things going on and you problem solve. Is that that you can't just solve a problem for solve for something that's not a problem, or that doesn't have any sort of parameters, right? If it's too nebulous, then like how you mentioned about like which stages of the ones that matter that move forward in the revenue, if it's too nebulous, like you're just going to end up using like, oh yeah, this was a popular campaign because we got extra impressions. Well, that's cool, but like what do those impressions, like I can get you thousands of impressions, does not mean it turns into business.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, and so I think, yeah, I see your now you mentioned I see your chemistry textbook behind you. Uh, but
But I won't let go of my anatomy textbook. Every time someone in the house gets sick or injured or, something's going on, I'm like, look, it's right here. This is what we do next. Um,
that's much
but
better than WebMD, that's for sure. But yeah, so I think no, but it's a little bit of a tough pill to swallow for I think a lot of marketers because they kind of got attracted to the field often for the kind of creative side of the role, which as we talked about a lot
which
on
is
this question
great.
already, it's critical. It's not optional, the creative part of the job.
None of
But
this is optional.
yeah, but unfortunately, it's all required. Like it's a competitive world, it's a difficult job, and to really be credible and successful, you kind of have to do both, in my opinion.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, that's what, the premise of this whole podcast is you have to be able to blend creativity, science, and strategy. And if you leave one of those behind, you're just not going to get as far as you could.
Mhm.
And I have grown up in my professional life to realize there's plenty of people doing a subpar job and still magically operating their businesses, but that's not what we want. We want to be successful.
Yeah, exactly. That's absolutely right. Yeah, and I guess I suppose to the second question, I'll just answer in brief about how to use data in actual go to market. It just all goes back to my point that I was trying to sharing about like is it true?
Mhm,
Um, and there's a related concept of it might be true. You might know it to be true. You might be able to prove it to yourself, but is it credible in the market? And so it's really beneficial in our market to make bold claims, like kind of half-ass qualified claims, kind of they don't get the sufficient attention. They don't kind of break through amidst all the marketing advertising we see every day. So you need to feel comfortable making kind of bold and boldly stated claims. The problem is that they also need to survive scrutiny through one or two clicks past.
mhm.
And that's like goes back to what we talked about earlier about how if the product doesn't do that, it's a house of cards. And another is like if that ROI just isn't available or the price isn't actually better or whatever the case may be. And so one of the best ways to overcome that hurdle is using real data. So we have this stat we use. So we tried really hard to remove all the outliers or whatever and process the actual signups to our product and how long did it take somebody to get value.
Mhm.
And so we have a competitive talking point, which is a typical competitor takes 6 months. We take 23 minutes, which sounds ludicrous, right?
Right.
But if somebody actually wanted to see the data study we did, I have it. It's true. The average person from when they first sign up to when they first get value from the product is 23 minutes. And
Yeah.
so I can make that very, very bold claim with extraordinary confidence, because if I actually had to show the data on like a LinkedIn livecast or something, I could. And I'm not like scared to do that if need be. So that's kind of a great example of where the data, you can make a bold claim, you can back it with something credible. And then you need to be able to back that with like a genuine willingness to like kind of go and have a fight over it if you have to. So
Well, and then, kind of circling back, which is a cliche phrase, I apologize to the listeners for using. But earlier, we talked about the woman whose voice was breaking because she had previously implemented something that blew up in her face. And when you are able to like put the proof and the transparency and the facts, the objective data and facts out there with these claims, then you don't put someone in the position of being the person that regrets your platform, your service, your widget, your whatever it is you're selling. And that is where I think a true component of being customer centric lies is that you have to care enough about your product and your customer to not put them in a bad position.
yeah, because I mean, God forbid somebody believes one of your lies, stakes their career on one of your lies, and then gets fired over one of your lies. Like that's not a world I want to live in, and not a responsibility I wanna carry with me. So
Exactly. That's not how I want to do business. And I am continually disappointed in my fellow man who decide and woman clearly who decide that that's the way that they're going to operate. And I think to kind of psychoanalyze it a little bit is that whenever I see a business operating like that, it tells me they're not good at what they do, because if they were any good, they wouldn't have to be so desperate.
yeah, yeah.
um, so we've got two questions left. I'm gonna kind of shrink them down. But what is the future of marketing, and what do you think it should be? Do you think that they're the same, just super high level?
I mean, God, I know I need to answer quickly because we're running out of time. But I guess the thing I would say about the future of marketing is that I actually think that this emotional appeal part of it is just durable and it's forever. It's
Yep.
not going to change. I do think that like the tactical mix is changing so fast. Even from like I'm not that old, but my career is like it's radically different how you are an effective marketer or not than even just 5-10 years ago. I mean, just look at what's happened to Twitter slash X in a short period of time. Like it's just a radically different place than it was 5 years ago, and the tactics one would use if you were going to participate at all are radically different. But sort of that the fundamentals I think will be the same, and so I think that that's like one thing that you can go read. Sexism aside, you can go read David Ogilvy's books from like the 50s and still extract knowledge that is still extremely valuable for marketing today, and that gives me some solace and peace about our discipline and about the future of all of us that are participating in it. But I would pair that with the emphasis that we have to be constantly reskilling. Saying to a marketer that you need to know SQL 5-10 years ago is a bonkers thing. It wouldn't have made any sense for 99% of marketers. Now I would say it's the inverse. It's kind of crazy for 99% of marketers not to. So I think the technical reskilling and the channel level reskilling is happening faster than ever, and yet somehow the fundamentals have not changed. And I think it's a very interesting thing and a challenging thing for all of us to navigate for the sake of our careers.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. I'm still good at stuff that I don't use anymore for any reason whatsoever because it's just not a needed skill
Mhm,
because the requirements changed.
mhm,
Um, no one's expecting me to be the graphic designer. They're expecting me to be in SQL and to be, doing everything else. Um, Now, we've asked you a lot of questions, but what is a question someone should ask you, but they don't? Maybe they talk about, like they come to you for X, Y, and Z. They really need to start like way back at ABC.
mhm.
Maybe it's just something that you just want people to know and you feel like you just don't get a chance to talk about it enough.
Well, I'll tell you, this isn't exactly an answer, but I will tell you like a life hack I learned from somebody that has just been wildly helpful for me. It's in this vein, which is whenever I'm talking to somebody a specialist in a discipline that I don't understand, especially if it's like a contractor for my house or something about my job or whatever, I always invariably just ask them, what do smarter people than I ask you at this point in the conversation? And I almost always get back some answer of something interesting that I never would have thought to ask. It's like it saved my bacon a bunch of times with like hiring people, hiring vendors, dealing with contractors around my house, whatever. So just a good life hack. Ask them what you should have asked them that you didn't yet. And
This
often
is a
you'll
little
find,
meta because that's what I just asked
yeah,
you.
exactly. It's a little meta, but I wanted to affirm it's a very
For
good
sure.
question. And I appreciate you asking it. Um, I guess the specific thing I might say for when people ask me for advice or whatever is like something I notice a lot is that so I don't mean this, I mean this humbly as best as I can. It's like I'm pretty successful and I'm pretty good at my work. And people I think they ask me questions because they want some of that knowledge and insight for themselves. I think the problem is that a lot of this is contextual. So I think the thing that they need to, what I would really encourage them to go a little step further is to probe more deeply on the fit between my situation and where my advice is coming from and theirs. Um, because I can answer your questions based on my time working at a big giant publicly traded company. I can answer your questions based on my time working at a teeny tiny little company. And the answers actually will be very, very different, and how you apply them will be very, very different. And so I think it's very helpful to whatever. How can I increase my lead generation for next quarter? Very reasonable question, one that I can answer for you probably better than many people. But the deeper thing is I need more context from you, and you need to qualify my advice for your situation. I think that we all kind of I want some magic wand piece of advice that I can just drop into my life and blow out all of my objectives. It doesn't exist. Um, and so I think that asking like, how did you apply that? Where did you learn that? In what situation? What was the context? Did that work here and there or only here? That kind of stuff. It sometimes will ruin what seems like good advice. Like, oh wow, let me jot that down and go do that. But by asking those follow-up questions, maybe you realize, no, I shouldn't do that. That's a Brian when he had, a budget that numbered in the 10 millions suggestion, not a Brian when he had a budget measured in the thousands suggestion. And so I think that kind of context is often missing from discussions like this.
I agree. I agree. The perfect strategy doesn't exist, just the one that fits the best for your circumstances.
Hmm.
And there couldn't be any worse idea than trying to find some holy grail of like playbook and then applying it to something that it just was never meant for.
Yeah. And yet I think that's what a lot of people are trying to do when they ask for advice.
Oh
Uh,
yeah.
yeah.
I mean, I wish it would work. I
Mhm.
wish and that's where I struggle with asking for advice. I'm like, but their XYZ was different than my XYZ. So like, I could ask them and I'm sure that they had the really right answer for what they did, but that's not what I'm trying to do.
Yeah.
Um,
And a lot of it's to go back to the STEM conversation, a lot of it's influenced by survivor bias and things like that. And so
yeah,
it's, if you understand those concepts, then you kind of understand how to interpret advice, because the advice is always given freely and given with good intent. But you need to understand how to interpret it, and you need to seek the other information around it so that you can localize it to your situation, or maybe say it cannot be localized to my situation. I just shouldn't do this thing that is a good idea, but not for me.
yeah. Or it is a good idea, but it's for everyone and everyone's already doing it.
Could be very
You know,
possible.
there's that too. For people that found our recording of this via LinkedIn, where everyone on LinkedIn tells you that they've got the exact playbook for you.
Mhm.
Um, but I appreciate you answering all my questions in this conversation. If someone wanted to follow up and talk to you more, or maybe they wanted to ask you a question with appropriate context, how would they get a hold of you, or where would they look?
They just find me on LinkedIn. I'm fairly responsive there amidst all the sales outreach and things, and happy to answer questions. And yeah, that's probably the best way to track me down, or just email me at brian@hightouch.com. I'm decent on email, though I often fall behind. So
Right. And that's Brian with a Brian,
yep.
just because people spell it differently. And then if anyone has any questions for me or they want to talk more, I'm on LinkedIn. Or you can email me at info@markigy.com. Thank you so much and have a great day.
Thank you so much, Sam.